We begin in Syria, where a ceasefire meant to end deadly clashes between Bedouin and Druze fighters appears close to collapsing. Smoke could be seen rising from a Druze village in southern Syria on Friday, where violence has left almost 600 people dead in recent days. That's according to a monitoring group. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is now reporting new clashes west of Sweida. The warring parties are described as, quote, tribal fighters and Bedouin supported by the authorities on the one side against Druze fighters on the other. Well, Syrian government forces tasked with quelling the violence had withdrawn from the area on Thursday as part of a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. Today, there's uncertainty whether Syrian government troops are returning to the south to deal with the new violence. Syrian media and international news agencies have been reporting that government troops were preparing to redeploy, citing an array of sources. A government for Syria's Interior Ministry later issued a public denial of this. Let's turn now to our Beirut bureau chief, Mohammed Shreite. Mohammed, we've got conflicting reports coming from Syria on army forces being deployed and then a denial of that. What can you tell us about what's happening on the ground there now?
So as of now, we do have a statement from the Interior Ministry spokesperson denying claims that the government forces have entered Sweida yet. Now we're hearing reports about government forces getting ready to re-enter Sweida to quell the deadly clashes between tribal and Druze militants. And this seems to be coordinated between Israel and Syria through back channels to avoid a collision course. We're reading reports citing Israeli sources saying that Israel will allow limited entry of Syrian government forces to the area to restore order and stop these clashes as it's getting out of control. That said, it means that Israel maybe is concluding that someone needs to step in to put end to these sectarian clashes, and that cannot be Israel. It has to be government forces. But it's unclear now how the Druze militants will respond to the possible redeployment of government forces. This was not acceptable and was refused by key Druze figures over the past few days, and in fact, it fueled the violence further.
From outside, it's hard to really understand what's going on there for many of us. Can you explain for us briefly, Mohammed, what led to this point where we are now?
Yeah, it's very hard to verify what exactly has been happening given the situation on the ground. What we know for sure is that clashes has reoccurred between Sunni tribal fighters and Druze militants in Sweida after the ceasefire was announced yesterday. We've talked to many sources on the ground, including DW contributors, and it seems like that following the withdrawal of government forces from the area, Druze fighters have launched attacks on Bedouin villages, and that prompted thousands of Bedouin fighters to gather from many areas across the country and head to Sweida to take part in these fightings. And that explains why government forces today are potentially getting ready to redeploy in Sweida.
You mentioned the apparent reversal in Israel's position on what's happening there, at least temporarily. An Israeli official did tell the Reuters news agency that the Syrian army would be allowed to operate south of Damascus, despite drawing a red line there yesterday. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think, as I said, maybe Israel is sensing that the situation is clearly getting out of control even after announcing the ceasefire. And Israel does not have troops on the ground. So there must be someone that can step in and police the situation over there before it really gets out of control, as sectarian clashes has been increasingly happening overnight. And I mean, as of now, I'm still getting footage of clashes happening in the outskirts of Sweida between tribal fighters and Druze militants. And I'm seeing social media videos supporting the fact that tribal fighters are pushing more forces from all over Syria towards Sweida.
Mohammed, thank you very much for filling us in there. That was DW's Beirut bureau chief, Mohammed Shreite, in Lebanon. Well, let's get some analysis on this now from Sami Akil. He's the co-chair of the political bureau at the Change for Syria network. Thanks for joining us. Sami, the ceasefire in southern Syria appears to be collapsing. Where do you see this heading?
Well, thanks, Terry. So I think the situation remains quite fragile. The Syrian government has really miscalculated its decision by intervening militarily, and there seems to have been some miscommunication between the Syrian authorities and the Israeli authorities on the one hand. It appears that the Syrian government is currently unwilling to intervene quite full on. And there have been also calls by both the Bedouin and the Druze representatives to kind of de-escalate the situation. However, at the same time, both sides kind of hold the Syrian government responsible for the current situation. So unless there is a permanent ceasefire, the situation might escalate quite drastically, especially if Druze fighters manage to take control of Sweida city. So the situation remains quite precarious, Terry.
As you know, the Syrian army apparently deployed in Sweida a couple of days ago, but the Druze community there claims that they only made things worse. You mentioned communication being an issue. Is there any reason to believe that things will be better this time if they return?
Well, it depends on the approach. So one thing you have to remember is that the Syrian government or the Syrian Ministry of Defense has been restructuring for quite some time since the fall of the collapse of the Assad regime. So what we're experiencing now is still a very fragile chain of command within the Syrian military establishment. I don't think that the decisions or the atrocities that were committed by some Syrian army officers or military officials within the Syrian military establishment was directly ordered. However, there is a clear lack of discipline within the Syrian military establishment. So it remains precarious. The entering of several Bedouin and several Bedouin tribes from various outskirts of Syria only complicates the matter even further, as it remains to be seen if the Syrian army establishment has actually enough sway to prevent further attacks, and if there is actually a clear chain of command or communication between the tribal forces and the Syrian armed forces.
Now, this is another test, clearly, for Syria's interim president and his new government. How would you say the government is handling all this so far?
Well, I think it's been quite a disastrous military offensive and perhaps the most consequential of the Bashar government since taking power in December 2024. I think there has been a clear mismanagement, both on the military but also on the political front from the Syrian military establishment. You have to remember that back in March, there were already a number of recorded atrocities in the Syrian coast, and that was kind of the first strike of the Syrian government. Obviously, its inability to rein in rival military factions who have officially been incorporated within the Syrian military establishment and defense ministry is a major point of concern. I do think that if the situation prolongs and the international community will have to step in some way or the other if we see further massacres and human rights violations undertaken by several factions.
Sami, thank you very much for that analysis. That was Sami Akil, co-chair of the political bureau of the Change for Syria network.
Thank you, Terry.
And for the latest, we're going to turn to Tanya Kramer, who is our correspondent in Jerusalem. Tanya, what are you hearing from there? What is the Israeli response to the current developments in Syria?
Well, this is, of course, watched very, very closely over here. And we're getting reports here, although I have to stress these are unconfirmed and based on a political source, but being talked about here in the local media, Israeli media, that, there are reports that Israel would allow a limited number of Syrian government forces to enter the area of Sweida for the next 48 hours. Now, we have to wait and see. There has been a lot of information and disinformation been circling around in the course of the morning. So we have to wait and see whether this is confirmed. But if that would be confirmed, that means there seem to be some back channel working here, in the sense that, you know, everyone is trying to diffuse these tensions right now in the area. But again, we have to wait and see whether this is actually happening.
Right, Tanya, and if it is confirmed, it would be significant because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday that Israel would not allow any Syrian military forces south of Damascus. If it is confirmed, why would he have now reversed that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this would be an absolute U-turn. And as you said, we've heard time and time again in the past couple of days from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel doesn't want to see any of those government forces near Sweida, near the area as well, in order also to protect the Druze minority there. So that would be absolutely significant. And I think, you know, at the moment we can only speculate about it because we have to wait and see whether this is actually happening on the ground. Also, you know, what would be the outcome of it, because the situation is very fragile, to say the least. But, you know, there could be also some pressure from the United States. All of this, of course, is right now speculation. We also heard the Syrian president, Shara, saying that he would hold accountable anybody who was, you know, committing their atrocities in the past couple of days. But of course, we also have to keep in mind that Israel has also made it very clear, you know, if it's in their interest, they could use a military force at any point if this wouldn't work out, if this is actually happening now.
All right, thanks for that. That is our chief correspondent in Jerusalem, Tanya Kramer. Thank you, Tanya.